everyone. Welcome back to the show. This is your host, Ruffin. Today I'm chatting with Juliette Richert. She's an investor at the Artemis Fund. Artemis is a seed stage VC firm. They are investing in female founders who are building businesses that will modernize wealth. I am so excited to share our conversation, so let's get started. Hi, Juliette. Welcome to the show. So excited to have you here today. Do you want to just start off by sharing a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today. I'm Juliette. I'm a senior analyst at the Artemis Fund. We invest in female-founded seed stage companies, democratizing wealth via fintech, care tech, and commerce enablement. I live in Austin. I've been here about a year, and since coming here, I have spent a lot of time building community for women and female founders, which is, really productive for the work I'm doing on the fund side, but also a big passion of mine is making sure women not only have access to tools and resources, but connection to each other. So those two things probably take up most of my time. Yeah, and I'm excited to dig into both of them.
Amazing. Well, we definitely have a lot in common in terms of our interests. So amazing. Before we talk more about the Artemis Fund and what you do there, can you share just a little bit about your background and how you even got into VC in the first place?
Yeah, totally. So I found Artemis when I was in college. I was studying economics at Rice in Houston, and had spent the previous summer, with an oil and gas company working on their corporate venture arm. So I was, helping them manage and evaluate a portfolio of upstream oil and gas tech. Which was my first exposure to venture, and it was very male dominated. But I had an incredible experience. And so I came back and started delving more into the Houston innovation ecosystem. And I was introduced to Stephanie, one of our GPs at Artemis, and they had launched the fund less than a year ago and needed someone part-time, like an intern, to do data entry and just sort of ad hoc admin tasks. And so I was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And so I started working with them in March of 2020, and loved the team immediately, loved the mission, and was like, I'm just going to do whatever they ask me to do. And so I said yes to anything. And so I went from doing purely data entry to conducting market analyses and doing founder screening calls. And, my hours and responsibilities and trust grew. While I was in this part-time role with Artemis, I also got the opportunity to work in operations in like a semi-chief of staff role at one of our portfolio companies, Good Find. And I was there for about a year. And that gave me a really incredible perspective, both from the operator side and the investor side. And so through Fund One, I did that. And then at the end of we're at the end of 2022, no, the beginning of 2022, we launched our second fund, and I joined in my current role. So I've been with Artemis full time since then. Yeah, and so that's how I got here.
Super cool. Since you kind of worked at a startup as well, and then you ended up choosing the venture capital path, like why were you drawn more to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that was one of the most difficult decisions for me to make during the time, because they were both such good opportunities. The startup I was working at still has just incredible growth potential. I love the team there. And so I was torn between two really incredible team cultures. And I ended up going with venture because for me, I'm so early on in my career, and I was, wanted to take the broad perspective, the broad approach, and get a good understanding of like, what does the landscape look like from more of a bird's eye view before I decide to specialize in something, especially because I think at that point I was still figuring out what even type of role would I like to do. Would it be ops or biz dev or, whatever. And venture capital is also a really competitive, space to break into. And so I thought it might be advantageous to earn my stripes on the VC side before going back into the operator side. And I think both would have been really incredible paths to take. But I'm grateful that I'm here now.
Amazing. So now tell us more about the Artemis Fund, more about who you guys invest in, anything you
Yeah,
can share there.
totally. Well, I mean, as I'm sure you and your listeners know, the dollars that go to female founders today, it's just like minuscule. And so Artemis was launched in 2019 to attack the problem of not only the very small capital that's allocated to female founders, but also how few women are investors in funds and in startups. And so two of our GPs started hosting dinners to educate women about VC as an asset class. And then the fund kind of spawned from those dinners. And so today we are investing out of our second fund, which is a $50 million fund. We write checks between $1 to $1.5 million to lead rounds for female founders, and taking a lead role is really important to us because especially at the early stages, we saw this gap in kind of more like institutional-ish investors who are willing to lead for early stage female founders. So we're able to leverage that lead position to really advocate for our founders, both in the the seed round, but also later on. And kind of more on the thesis, like thematic side, we're investing in wealth democratization, which can sound like a pretty big term, but we want to find solutions that will drive dollars and financial opportunities to more people who have been left out of our current system. And so we are focused on three main drivers of that: fintech, which is feels fairly direct, both like, increasing like payments infrastructure, right? Like decreasing the cost of payments, or, helping families make better financial decisions for themselves. But also in care technology. So thinking about child, elder care, like wellness in the workplace, things that traditionally women take on such a high burden of care that it can really limit professional growth and financial independence. And so what are the solutions we can do to address the core of that, right? And then commerce enablement with a focus on small businesses, making sure small businesses are able to access the tools and resources that larger businesses do, so that they can efficiently build sustainable businesses, access the financial resources that a larger business might be able to too. I can dig into any of that if you'd like me to.
Will you share some specific examples of companies on your portfolio? And then also, how does your team go about sourcing these companies?
Yeah, totally. So one of our companies one of our more recent investments out of Fund 2 is a company called Hello Divorce. And they enable anyone going through a divorce to complete the process online, both either independently or with a mediator, lawyer, or other experts support. This is a really interesting solution for us. We hadn't done legal tech previously, but they have managed to create a legal and fintech solution. So not only can you complete the divorce process there, and it's much more affordable than doing it, with a lawyer through the courts, but they're building out a suite of financial education and resources on the back end. So after you go through your divorce, normally, like you're just like flailing around. So much about your financial life is just like totally changed. And so Hello Divorce is providing the structure for you to be able to access either expert help or find your next financial advisor or like understand what happens to your 401k. And so there it's like, we think that not only should like, the families with resources be able to access this, but there are ways that tech can democratize these tools. And then sourcing, we get a lot of our companies through our co-investors and networks. I think we've built a really strong brand around being one of the funds for female founders. And so when a female founder hits someone's desk, they'll send it to us. And if you don't already do that, you should. Which is fantastic. And I think that the majority of our deals and our portfolio have come from our warm network, but it is very important to us that we are doing active outbound sourcing through newsletters and events and accelerators, because when we look at our pipeline, those deal sources are more diverse. And so if we just depended on our warm network, then we would be seeing a lot less diverse deals and doing the work and going out into those spaces. And so it's important to us that we're spending time there too.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And then when a deal comes across your desk, whether it's inbound or outbound, how does your team think about like due diligence and what are you guys looking for in an investment?
Yeah, totally. So I mean, due diligence is really important to us. We, even through the past, kind of crazy market, we were like, we diligence first approach. Uh, so what we're looking for is first a thesis fit, right? Does the solution drive towards our mission of, bringing more money making opportunities to more people? So we have to validate that. And then there's a founder fit, right? Does the founder have the market or, product expertise to bring this to market? And is the founder, and this can be harder to test for, right? But like, is the founder dedicated enough? Do they have the connection to the mission or the impact or whatever it is that's driving them that will get them over the humps that are like inevitable with any startup. We also, of course, think about the growth opportunity and how big can this get? How, can this return our fund, right? And so we see a lot of companies that could be really incredible, maybe acquisitions at like the, $10 or $20 million mark, right? But when we think about our fund modeling, that wouldn't make sense for us. And so there has to be a certain, growth trajectory that we believe is viable. Oh, and then another indicator we look for is we're investing at the seed stage, which is fairly early, but we still are looking for indicators of product market fit. Through traction and usually some early revenue, which can be, I think, more difficult for founders this early on, right? But we really like to see customers coming in, a strong pipeline with high, conversion rates, and then like, once you get this capital, how are you going to spend it, right? A clear execution plan post-raise, not just iterating is always important, but not just iterating to find out who your customer is going to be, but a really clear path to using the money wisely. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. And to your earlier point of like the idea has to be a big idea and how big can this business actually get? Can you share like a little bit more details around how your team thinks about that and like how big does a business actually need to get?
Yeah, totally. Well, and so I think the first question for that, right, is like, are there enough people who are going to pay for this, right? And so it's like that market sizing, market validation. You can do testing around, how pull the market size numbers, which is really important. Understand how much capital is actually out there to be spent. But then I think we also have to do some validation around the willingness to pay and an understanding of whether this solution is a need to have versus a want to have. Because especially in like recessionary markets, like we are kind of, starting to feel, we want products that people are going to have to keep paying for, versus something that comes off the balance sheet. And a really good indicator for that is like, is this helping this person make more money, right? Really directly and really, really efficiently. And then for how big does the company have to be? The modeling changes for every fund, right? So it's like for a smaller fund, it can be a little smaller, but as your fund gets larger, the exit potential has to be larger too. And so, we're always cognizant of that. But it changes for every fund, which is an interesting exercise. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And then once you guys invest in a company, how does Artemis support those portfolio companies, and how do you work with female founders going forward?
Yeah, totally. So we work really closely with our founders post-investment, I would say in three primary ways. They have a lead GP who checks in with them monthly, which is normally a time to go over strategy, whether that is business strategy, board and kind of like executive strategy or raise strategy, and the way that those founders use those one-on-one times, changes a lot depending on the needs of the time and the founder. We also have built out a really extensive network of experts and advisors that aren't necessarily potential investors in our fund or the company. Some of them are, but are people who maybe have really extensive B2B payments history, or are like experts and musicians and creators. So that when a problem comes up with our company, they need someone to consult with them. We can either place this person there, or this person can refer our founder to someone in their network who is going to be the one to provide some insight. And then we raise really heavily for our founders too. So I don't know the exact number on dollars of capital we've brought into our companies, but we go really hard to bat when our companies are raising. So whether that's closing out the seed round that we've just led, or raising the A, our like kind of time spent with companies really increases during those raise times, both making introductions, doing strategy work, and actively advocating for our founders with other investors.
Awesome. And then moving a little bit gears into your own personal passions and your own angel investments, can you share some spaces that you're super interested in investing in? And have you made some of your own angel investments? And can you share some of those?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I've made a couple of angel investments, nothing too big or quick yet. But one of the companies I invested in is a company called Lunch, and they're a B2B payments infrastructure for like underserviced industries, starting with scholastic vendors. And so I think the niche approach to solutions like this is a space that not a lot of people, probably not a lot of tech leaders, have experience in building for like school payments, right? But there's a lot of efficiency that could be serviced there, right? And I think the impact too to the education system is really interesting on dollars saved and time saved. And so I made that investment through Vitalize Angels. They have a syndicate that I was part of for a while, which when it comes to like, and I think maybe this is a later question, but but when it comes to getting involved in angel investing, I think joining a syndicate is a really good way to dip your toes into the water, because you have support doing diligence. Sourcing is done for you for the most part. And then you collectively get to write a larger check than you would as an individual. So it's a really good way to practice. on the like industry, space I'm excited about. I think a lot of my interests right now align with the work that I'm doing at Artemis too, because that's where I'm spending so much time. But recently I've been digging into the care economy really deeply, specifically elder care. And there's a huge opportunity as 10,000 people are turning 65 every day. And these people will soon need care if they don't already. And the labor force for paid caregivers is like, I don't know, I think almost half of how many elderly people there are. And so there's a huge supply and demand gap. Which means that these, aging individuals are leaning on their family members, often the women, which creates a really difficult balance of professional, if you have a job, staying at your job and caring for an aging parent can be a ton, because the average time spent outside of the job for someone caring for a loved one is 20 to 40 hours a week. And so I think the need there is just massive on the caregiving side. And then there are all sorts of interesting financial pieces to this too, like a huge lack of retirement savings for people getting older. The boomers own, I think, the majority of small businesses, and most of them don't have any sort of succession plan or plan to, sell. And so what do we do with all of those? And so the aging, our aging population poses a really interesting opportunity for some innovation.
Where do you find, or where do you read up on all of these things? And are there certain publications you would point people to, or certain great sources of information?
Yeah, totally. The majority of the way that I keep myself accountable for the sort of research is writing. So I've been trying to publish more work, and
Amazing.
yeah, so it's less of like day-to-day kind of reading, but these sprints really help dive in. There are a couple of really good, like, honestly, like New York Times articles, like more like society focused pieces on this, which is really interesting. But I think the pressure of having to write something really helps me organize my thoughts and get it all into one place, more than just the, like, reading up on newsletters every day. Yeah.
I love that. Are your pieces published?
Yeah. I'm gonna have one on care tech out by the end of February.
Amazing. Well, once you have it out, send it to me and I will
Okay.
obviously include it with all of this.
Oh,
Amazing.
amazing. Oh, good.
So back to the angel investing piece. Can you share or tell us a little bit more, or maybe give advice to women who want to get started angel investing? Like, sounds like Vitalize Angels might be a good place for people to look, but are there other like syndicate groups out there where they could start investing?
Totally. Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on where you are in your life too. For people who are maybe just getting started and want to practice looking at deals, and have like a little extra cash on the side. Some of the crowdfunding platforms can be good just to practice writing small checks. The really low barrier to entry. So like Republic and WeFunder. For people who might maybe be one step up, Vitalize is a really fantastic one because they have a low commitment amount, and I think it changes depending on the syndicate that you're looking for. I don't have any other syndicates top of mind, but there are for people who are maybe one step up, lots of city-based angel networks that you can get involved with. And then I think, again, for any larger group, the benefit is that you have support doing diligence, support sourcing, all of which can be really high barrier to entry if you're an individual. Also, getting yourself on the cap table of a company if you're, writing a really small check can be difficult. I think for people who are, mid-career and looking to make direct investments into startups, another good thing to do is to leverage your own expertise. and really embed yourself in startup networks that align with, where you can help. Because founders, sometimes capital isn't the most important thing. If you can add another layer of expertise or advisory service, that can be a good way to get involved with a company you're really excited about, versus just a check.
Yeah, great piece of advice. I've found myself kind of doing this with just content creation, and that's how I kind of get involved with different startups. So love that piece of advice. And since we're talking about resources, are there any great resources that you would share or point like underrepresented founders or investors to?
Totally. Okay, so I have seen some founders really utilize like accelerator networks very well. We have invested in several Techstars companies, which, and our founders have gotten a lot out of their experiences there, especially for founders who maybe haven't started businesses before or run their own businesses. I think accelerators can be really valuable. I think something else that I found building my network of female founders in Austin is that finding the networks of other underrepresented founders can be really, really important, especially if you are not surrounded by, other business owners, of your, whatever your thing is. I've seen that with the female founder groups. It's not just a like technical or business sharing opportunity, but it really is about like a shared experience, and finding that camaraderie, because I think as women, if you're surrounded by men, if you're in a really male dominated industry, it can be really isolating as a business owner, as a founder, which is already an isolating experience. And so creating that communal cushion it's been really incredible to see happen around me. And so I think responding to your own personal and kind of like social needs is really important, because that will give you a higher tolerance when things get really hard on the business side. I think that for investors, something really important is like also putting yourself in those spaces, right? And like finding where the underrepresented founders are around you, instead of just kind of doing the day-to-day, if it's in-person networking or whatever. It can be easier to lean on our networks rather than go out and push ourselves to, do sometimes the more, it's a little more tedious to go through a newsletter list and like pull out the founders that could be interesting, but I think it's important to do. And I think those are probably my biggest pieces of advice. I wish I had things that were a little more tangible or direct, but
super helpful. And I think the sense of community is so important. And I feel like I continue to hear that time and time again from especially the founders, but also from investors investing into underrepresented founders. So
yeah,
super cool that Artemis has built such a strong community. So that's amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome. Well, as we start to wrap things up, first of all, where can people find you? Where can people find the Artemis Fund?
Yeah, so we're just theartemisfund.com is our URL. You can find us on LinkedIn. I'm also on LinkedIn, just Juliette Richert. And people can reach out to me there. I'm pretty responsive on my LinkedIn DMs.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then final question, can you share a female founder, investor, or leader who inspires you and a little bit about why?
Yeah, totally. I am thinking about this, and I was thinking about, kind of the bigger people, like the Canva founder has been very top of mind recently. But I wanted to highlight an investor who works with us on the board of one of our companies, Anna Barber. She's the founder or co-founder of M13. And every time that we get on a call, I am so impressed with her and the team that she's built. She's so thoughtful with the way that she approaches founders, and just very data informed in the approach that they take, which is something that we're building at Artemis too, is like a very data driven approach to both our investment decisions and like the way we interact with founders. And at one of our last company's board meeting, she and her team made this entire market presentation on the market that our company is operating in. And so she and her team are educating, us and the founders themselves on what everything they're seeing in the market. And I think that approach of the investor as an educator, a sharer of knowledge, is really incredible. And they have built just such an extensive network in this like commerce piece, just such a strong expertise there. And so I hope one day to also be such a data driven and really experienced investor, and so that's my person.
Incredible. I have not had a chance to meet Anna, but I follow her work on LinkedIn. And yeah, they put out a ton of great education, and I love anyone that is sharing knowledge. So that was a great one to share. So thank you so much for coming on and doing the show. It was so great reconnecting with you, and love everything that you and your team at Artemis are working on.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love everything you're working on. Your work has been just really wonderful and joyful to listen to. And so I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Future is Female podcast. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. See you next time.